ਦ ਹਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਸ਼ੋਅ ਦੇ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਐਪੀਸੋਡ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪ ਸਭ ਦਾ ਕਰਦਾ ਹਾਂ ਹਾਰਦਿਕ ਸਵਾਗਤ। ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਮੇਰਾ ਸਾਥ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਮੰਡੇ ਟੂ ਫਰਾਈਡੇ ਸਵੇਰੇ 8 ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ 9 ਵਜੇ ਤੱਕ, ਮੰਡੇ ਟੂ ਥਰਸਡੇ ਰਾਤ ਨੂੰ 10 ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ 11 ਵਜੇ ਤੱਕ, ਅਤੇ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਸੈਟਰਡੇ ਨੂੰ 2 ਵਾਰੀ ਸਾਂਝ ਪਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਦੁਪਹਿਰ ਨੂੰ 2 ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ 3 ਵਜੇ ਤੱਕ ਅਤੇ ਰਾਤ 8 ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ 9 ਵਜੇ ਤੱਕ। ਇਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜੋਏ ਟੀਵੀ ਤੇ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹੋ, ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਵਿਜ਼ਨ ਟੀਵੀ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ 1 ਵਜੇ ਵੈਂਕੂਵਰ ਟਾਈਮ ਦੇ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਂਝ ਪਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਡੇਵਿਡ ਸੁਜ਼ੂਕੀ ਇੱਕ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਇਨਵਾਇਰਮੈਂਟਲਿਸਟ ਹਨ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਇਹ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਵੇਅਰਨੈਸ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾਏ ਕਿ ਇਨਵਾਇਰਮੈਂਟ ਪ੍ਰਤੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਸੁਹਿਰਦ ਹੋਈਏ, ਅਤੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਉਪਦੇਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਨ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਇਹ ਫਰਜ਼ ਬਣਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਨੂੰ, ਪਾਣੀ ਨੂੰ ਅਤੇ ਵਾਤਾਵਰਣ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਫ਼ ਰੱਖੀਏ। ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ, ਪੇਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇੰਟਰਵਿਊ। So first of all, a little bit about yourself. When did you come to Canada, and since when you got interested into environment?
My grandparents came from Japan in the early part of the 1900s. So my mother and father were both born in Vancouver. My dad in 1909, my mother in 1911. So I'm the second generation of Canadian-born in my family. Mm-hmm. When my father, for some reason, I don't know why, but he loved nature. He loved camping and fishing and gardening. So from my earliest memories of childhood, we were outside, up in the mountains, camping. And so I've always credited my father for that great love of nature. Now, when World War II happened and Japan attacked the United States in Pearl Harbor, then you know, the Japanese Canadians were evacuated, mm-hmm. and we were all moved out. I was 7 at the time. We were moved to the interior of British Columbia, way up in the mountains, which is now a provincial park, Valhalla Provincial Park.
Okay.
So as a boy, the interesting thing is that most of the kids my age, their parents spoke Japanese at home, mm-hmm. so they were fluently bilingual. My mom and dad were born in Canada. They spoke English at home, mm-hmm. so I couldn't speak Japanese. So the kids would pick on me all the time. So I didn't want to play with them. I was up in the mountains, just there with the moose, and I remember coming across a bear and a wolf, and that to me was where I learned to grow up and play. Mm-hmm. And so I've always felt a strong attachment to nature.
Wonderful. So that was because of your upbringing that you were very much involved in nature.
Yes.
But how did it come to your mind that this needs to be expanded at a higher level, and that's why you established the David Suzuki Foundation also?
Well, you see, I had been involved with environmental issues since 1962, mm-hmm. when a woman named Rachel Carson published Silent Spring about the impact of pesticides. And millions of people then were caught up in this environmental movement. Mm-hmm. And it became clear to me that we needed to try to get to what are the deep underlying causes of our destructiveness. And because I was a scientist, I felt that we needed an organization that based its decisions on the best science. Mm-hmm. So we're a science-based organization looking for solutions, deep underlying solutions, because it was clear to me that we were going the wrong way, that human beings have become so numerous, our populations are so great, mm-hmm. our technology so powerful, our consumption so great, that we were actually destroying the air, the water, the soil.
Right.
And I was worried about my children and grandchildren.
So that was the 60s, and now in this 21st century, how serious is this issue, you feel?
It's way worse, and that's the tragedy. In 1988, climatologists met in Toronto, and they were absolutely convinced global warming is happening, we're causing it, and they called for a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, mm-hmm. in 15 years. If we had done it, we would now be saving tens of billions of dollars in health bills, in terms of cost of protecting the environment. We would have been making money, mm-hmm. and it would have been very easy to reduce further, but we didn't do it. Mm-hmm. And that's the tragedy, is that we didn't listen to the scientists in 1988, and things are much worse today.
So do you feel the people are now, have they realized that they need to listen?
I think Hurricane Sandy has been a huge stimulus to that. Now, I was very encouraged that in a poll taken before Hurricane Sandy, 98% of Canadians believed that global warming is happening, mm-hmm. and that humans are somehow involved.
Right.
If you go to the United States, it's not anything like that. And what's really disturbing is if you looked at the 3 presidential debates Not one word about global warming.
That's right.
Not one word about environmental degradation. And the people that are going to pay the price for what's going on now are not going to be the rich countries.
Right.
It's going to be people in India, in China, in Africa. This is where the real ecological impact of what we're doing is. You know, can you imagine India if the monsoon rains don't come? The monsoons are absolutely crucial to farmers. Well, we know that we're affecting the monsoons now, and that should put the fear into everybody's hearts. We're changing the world so much that the monsoons may absolutely disappear.
Right.
For me as a Canadian, what's Canada without ice in the Arctic?
Right.
It strikes fear in my heart. And I hope Hurricane Sandy has been the final nail in the board saying, look, it's real, let's get on with doing something.
As far as the Canadians are concerned, as you said, they are much aware about this issue. But what about the government? Do you think that enough steps are being taken by this present government to create awareness and also to do some concrete work?
Mr. Harper comes from Calgary, and he seems to have forgotten. He's not the member from Calgary. He is our Prime Minister. And as a Prime Minister, I would have thought he would see Canada in a bigger way. But he seems to be fully intent on developing the tar sands in Alberta, and to hell with everything else. And I think this is a tragic situation. You know, I said 98% of Canadians believe climate change is happening. I think the 2% that don't are Mr. Harper and his cabinet. But the vast bulk of Canadians are saying, Mr. Harper, for heaven's sakes, take this thing seriously and do something about it. He hasn't.
Kyoto Accord was one such internationally, you can say, an
Yes.
accord which could have brought all the countries together. But there also, what has happened as far as Canada is
Well,
concerned?
it did bring everybody together. At Kyoto, people say, well, it's not fair. India and China are not in the Kyoto Accord. India and China were at Kyoto in 1997. I was there. My foundation was there. And everybody there agreed. We in the rich countries had created the problem. And we were still the primary contributors of greenhouse gases. So everyone agreed. The rich countries will be the ones to cap emissions and bring it down so that by 2012, then we will bring the rest of the world in.
Right.
But allow India and China to let their economies grow. We understood that. As soon as Kyoto was over, the Canadians began to say, well, it's not fair. Why aren't the Indians and Chinese? Why should we do it when we created the problem?
Right.
And it was up to us, and everybody agreed. Now, Mr. Harper has run, every year he's run, on one of his planks is law and order.
Right.
When Mr. Chrétien ratified Kyoto in 2001, he didn't ratify it as a liberal. He ratified it as our Prime Minister.
Right.
And he committed Canada to the Kyoto process. Now, Mr. Harper ran on law and order, but as soon as he got in, he said, I'm not going to pay attention to Kyoto. So he was declaring international law was not of any interest to him.
Right.
So I wonder, what does law and order mean to our Prime Minister? He then passed a law saying elections will be held every 4 years on a set date.
Right.
And within months, he broke his own law.
Right.
So what the hell does law and order mean to the Prime Minister of this country?
Right.
Doesn't make any sense to me.
So now it's quite strange that because we have come out of the Kyoto Accord also, there's no international regulation, while now the Prime Minister has been giving some statements. So what needs to be done as far as the Canadian government is concerned, and also internationally also by the governments?
Well, I think that we in the rich countries are setting the example. If countries like Canada and the United States are not showing by their actions that we are reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, why should India or China or Indonesia or Brazil pay any attention to us? We're telling them, now don't you burn any more coal. Oh, bad, bad. What the hell? We're the model.
Right.
We're rich. If we can't afford to do it, why should the poor countries pay any attention? So I believe there's a huge responsibility on our part. We created the problem, and we are setting the model. We've got to show that we're going to cut back. And the tragedy is huge opportunity there. If Canada made a big commitment, think of wind and solar and geothermal, and there are all kinds of other alternatives.
Right.
And we just have to make the commitment to go to a cleaner energy future.
Now that we have realized that consumerism has had its impact in the Western world, but this same thought is now being thrown in the developing countries
Exactly.
also, like you talk about India
Exactly.
or China. So how do you feel that those governments also will come to realize that ultimately we have to think about the environment also?
Well, I'm very encouraged by this tiny country called Bhutan, which is caught between China and India. And because these two huge powers were surrounding them,
Right.
they hid from the rest of the world. They were surrounded by mountains and they just hid. But in 1961, they decided that the world was changing. They had to go out and begin to see what was going on. And the Bhutanese were shocked at what was considered development.
Right.
Development seemed to be grow the GDP, buy more stuff. And they said, that's a weird kind of development. We should be saying we need a new paradigm of development, and well-being and happiness surely should be the goal.
Absolutely.
And this tiny country has introduced this to the United Nations and said, let's set this as our agenda. And that's very exciting because I think it will resonate very, very well with people in India and China who have a much more kind of a Buddhist, Hindu tradition where I think balance with the rest of nature is a big part of, the Western idea of go forth and conquer the world and exploit what you want. That's a Western tradition that is not, it's alien to the Orient.
A lot is being done by the David Suzuki Foundation, but if you could briefly let us know what kind of impact your foundation is having and what kind of research and work is being done by David Suzuki.
Well, I don't know in terms of reaching out to the new immigrant communities. I don't know what the impact is. I can only tell you anecdotally that there has been a tremendous response. We have two people. Harpreet is working with the South Asian community, and Winnie Ho is working with the Chinese community. Tremendous response in the sense of welcoming us into the communities and a great deal of interest in the message. The message, of course, is immigrant communities, like everyone else, are going to be impacted by what we're doing to climate. But many of the immigrant communities from the countries that they came from, those countries are going to be impacted even more than Canada. So I think they will get the message, we've got to do something, because their families and their relatives are all going to feel it.
And that is probably the reason that you started Punjabi by Nature. So what prompted you to think on those grants to start?
That's the brilliance of Harpreet. And, I had nothing to do with it. Although I have to, the one thing I take pride in is that the first thing I got was a shot of me with a turban that was superimposed on it. What do they call that, where you move stuff around?
Right.
And I looked at that and I said, come on, that looks so phony. Let's do it if we're going to do it.
Right.
And it turned out to be a wonderful exercise, and I think everybody had a good time with it.
So now you have come up with this Punjabi by Nature, and you have reached the Punjabis at large through the media and interacting with them.
I hope so.
Oh, absolutely. So what do you feel and what do you want from them? Because ultimately it's the people who have to make the choices. And governments can only initiate only if pressure is put on them by the people.
Yes.
So how do you and what do you want from the people, and especially the Punjabi community? What should they do?
Well, the first thing we want to do is engage young people. We want to engage young people in getting outside, because I am sure Punjabi young people are no different from the rest of Canada.
Absolutely.
They're spending way too much time inside. They're looking at text messaging, using their computers. The human body evolved to move, to exercise. Now we're going against what is in our nature.
Right.
And we've got to rediscover that. There are many studies out there now showing that when you're surrounded by trees and green things, you are healthier. Things like bullying, attention deficit, these kinds of things disappear when you're out with trees and plants. So we've got to kind of get our kids, and I'm telling kids, it's really important for your mom and dad to start telling our politicians, look, we're not balanced with the environment. And get your mom and dad to start saying at all candidates' meetings, what is your party going to do about this? Because we want you to do something about these environmental issues.
You have been raising your voice vociferously and still going strong. And if the people and the governments do not heed to what is being brought forward as far as the environment is concerned, what do you foresee?
I don't want to get into that because, I'm in the last part of my life. I'm in the last years, and whatever happens or doesn't happen is going to have no impact on my life. But I have 2 very young grandchildren, and I can see that the world is changing very rapidly. And so I don't want to even think about what lies ahead. Hurricane Sandy, finally people are saying, oh my goodness, is this what's in store? And climatologists are saying yes. We don't know whether Hurricane Sandy was a direct result of global warming, but this is what's going to happen. Storms are going to be more intense, more frequent, and the insurance industry for over 10 years has been saying, do something about global warming. We're going broke, paying more and more money out for these climate-related things. I want old people, we call them elders. I want elders to come and start talking to young people, talking about the kinds of changes that are needed.
Towards the end, again, because you have learned Bhangra also, and what prompted you to learn Bhangra, and also what, in Punjabi, if you can say something to our viewers?
Well, Sat Sri Akal Ji. I hope that's understandable by your audience. But really, it's an initiative that was brought from our staff, from Harpreet, that came and said, this is what we'd like to do. And I think that showing respect for the Punjabi culture by taking, wearing their regalia and actually trying to learn some of the dance, I hope people understand that I come to this community with respect, and I want to reach out and begin a dialogue with them.
Thank you very much. Pleasure meeting you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.